I'm not someone who gets scared easily. I loved horror movies, the scarier the better. I'd watch them late at night, the house dark, silent, but no matter how tense the scenes got, I could always remind myself it was just a movie, just fiction. Real life wasn't like that. At least, that's what I used to believe. That night started like any other. It was late September and the weather had taken a sudden turn. The air was cool, almost chilly, and a storm was rolling in, the kind that always seemed to come out of nowhere as summer slipped into fall. I was home alone, enjoying the quiet after a long day. I had the house to myself. My roommate, Sam, was out of town for the weekend, and I planned to make the most of it. The rain had just started, a soft patter against the windows that gradually grew louder, more insistent. I was in the living room, curled up on the couch with my laptop, halfway through a new game I'd been obsessing over for days. It was one of those story-driven games, the kind that pulls you in with its world and characters. I was lost in it, completely absorbed, the outside world fading away as I navigated through the game's eerie, haunted landscapes. The first flash of lightning pulled me out of the game, the sudden brightness filling the room for a split second before plunging it back into darkness. I glanced up, noticing for the first time how dark it had gotten outside. The storm had moved in fast, the wind picking up, rattling the windows. Thunder rumbled overhead, a deep, growling sound that seemed to vibrate through the walls. I hit pause on the game, feeling a sudden urge to stretch my legs. The room felt too quiet now, the sounds of the storm creeping in around the edges of my consciousness. I stood up and walked over to the window, peering out into the street. The rain was coming down in sheets, the streetlights casting distorted reflections on the wet pavement. The houses across the street were dark, the windows lifeless and empty, everyone huddled inside against the storm. I was just about to turn away when I saw him. He was standing on the sidewalk, directly across the street from my house. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but then another flash of lightning lit up the sky and I saw him clearly. A man in a gray hoodie, standing completely still, as if he was looking directly at me. My first thought was that he must be waiting for someone, maybe one of the neighbors. But the way he stood there, so unnervingly calm in the middle of the storm, set off alarm bells in my mind. I watched him for a moment longer, hoping he would move, give some indication that he was just a normal person caught in the rain. But he didn't move. He just stood there, staring. A cold shiver ran down my spine, and I quickly pulled the curtain closed. It was probably nothing, I told myself. Just some guy who got caught in the storm. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, that there was something more to his presence than just bad timing. I tried to focus on the game again, but my concentration was broken. I kept glancing at the window, half expecting to see him standing there, staring in at me. After a few minutes, I gave up and turned the game off. The house felt too big, too empty, the silence pressing in around me. I wandered into the kitchen, thinking I might make some tea to calm my nerves. The rain was still coming down hard, the sound of it drumming against the roof filling the room. I was reaching for the kettle when the doorbell rang. The sound cut through the quiet like a knife, making me jump. I stood there for a moment, staring at the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't expecting anyone, especially not in this weather. Who could it be? The doorbell rang again, more insistent this time. I slowly made my way to the front door, my mind racing. It could be a delivery person, I thought, or maybe one of the neighbors needing something. But as I reached the door and peered through the peephole, my breath caught in my throat. It was him. The man in the hoodie was standing on my front porch, his face hidden in the shadow of the hood. But I could feel his eyes on me, could sense the intensity of his gaze even through the door. I froze, my hand hovering over the doorknob. What the hell was he doing here? How did he get from the street to my porch so quickly, so silently? My mind was a whirlwind of questions, none of which had any comforting answers. He didn't move. He just stood there, waiting. I didn't open the door. Something deep inside me told me that would be a very bad idea. Instead, I backed away, moving as quietly as I could, my heart hammering in my chest. I crept back into the living room, keeping the lights off, hoping he wouldn't see me through the windows. I could hear my own breathing, ragged and uneven, the sound almost as loud as the rain. For what felt like an eternity, I just stood there, listening, waiting. But the doorbell didn't ring again. Slowly, I began to relax, convincing myself that maybe he'd gone. Maybe it was just some weird prank or a case of mistaken identity. But then I heard it, the sound of footsteps, soft but unmistakable, moving around the side of the house. My blood ran cold. He was still here, still looking for a way in. I moved as quietly as I could, trying to stay calm, trying to think. The doors were locked, but there were windows all around the house, and the thought of him finding a way in, slipping through the shadows while I stood helplessly inside, was almost too much to bear. I grabbed my phone and dialed Sam's number. He didn't answer. Of course, he was probably out with friends, his phone on silent. I cursed under my breath, my mind racing through my options. I could call the police, but what would I say? That some guy was standing outside my house? They wouldn't take it seriously, not unless he actually tried to break in. The footsteps stopped, and for a moment, everything was eerily silent. I held my breath, straining to hear any sign of movement. But there was nothing, just the rain, pounding relentlessly against the windows. Then, out of nowhere, there was a loud bang, a single, sharp sound that echoed through the house, making me jump out of my skin. It was coming from the back door, the one that led out to the small patio and garden. I turned and ran toward it, my heart pounding in my ears. I reached the kitchen just in time to see him, a fleeting glimpse of movement through the glass, the dark shape of the man in the hoodie pressing up against the door. His face was obscured, but I could see his hands, pale and ghostly, as they pressed against the glass, trying the handle. Panic surged through me, and without thinking, I grabbed the nearest thing, a kitchen knife, sharp and cold in my trembling hand. I held it in front of me as if it could somehow protect me from the horror outside. The door rattled as he tried to force it open, but thankfully, it was locked. I watched in frozen terror as he continued to press against the glass, his breath fogging up the window. He was close enough now that I could see his eyes, cold, dark, and utterly devoid of any emotion. For a moment, I was paralyzed, caught between the instinct to run and the need to stand my ground. Then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, he stepped back, melting into the shadows. I could barely breathe as I waited, expecting him to try another door, another window. But he didn't. He was gone. I don't know how long I stood there, clutching the knife, my body shaking with adrenaline and fear. The storm raged on outside, but the house was silent, every creak amplified by the tension that hung in the air. Finally, I managed to gather my courage and make my way to the front door. I hesitated for a moment, then slowly opened it, peering out into the storm. The porch was empty, the street beyond dark and deserted. But as I closed the door, I saw it. A small piece of paper taped to the glass at eye level. My hands were trembling as I reached for it, peeling it off with a sense of dread that settled in the pit of my stomach. The note was simple, written in neat, precise handwriting. "Have you forgotten?" The words on the note haunted me for days. I couldn't stop thinking about them, couldn't stop replaying that night over and over in my mind. The man in the hoodie, the way he had moved so silently, so deliberately. And that question, "Have you forgotten?" What the hell did it mean? I tried to go about my daily life as normally as possible, but the truth was, I was rattled. I'd never experienced anything like that before, and the fear had settled deep in my bones, gnawing at me whenever I was alone. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, jumping at every small noise, every creak of the floorboards. Sam noticed something was off the moment he got back. "Dude, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost," he said, dropping his bag by the door and giving me a concerned look. I forced a laugh, trying to brush it off. "Yeah, just didn't sleep well. The storm was pretty intense." He nodded, accepting the excuse without question. But as the days went by, he started to pick up on my unease. I'd catch him watching me, his brow furrowed with concern, but he didn't press. That was one of the things I appreciated about Sam. He knew when to give me space. Then, one night, I got a call. It was late, probably close to midnight, and I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, and I grabbed it, hoping it was Sam, who was out late again, but it wasn't Sam. The caller ID was blocked, just a series of numbers that didn't make any sense. For a moment I considered not answering, but something compelled me to press the accept button. "Hello?" Silence. I could hear nothing but the sound of my own breathing, the steady thump of my heart in my ears. Hello? I tried again, my voice trembling slightly. Then I heard it, a soft, raspy whisper, barely audible over the static. Have you forgotten? The line went dead. I stared at the phone, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I didn't recognize the voice, but the words were the same chilling question that had been left on the note. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, that pale, emotionless face staring at me from the shadows. I tried to tell myself it was just a coincidence, just some sick joke, but I knew better. He wasn't done with me. And then I heard it, the sound of footsteps, soft and deliberate, moving through the house. My blood turned to ice. I knew those footsteps. I had heard them before. I stood up, my heart racing, every nerve in my body screaming at me to run. But where would I go? There was nowhere to hide, nowhere he couldn't find me. I grabbed the kitchen knife again, my hands trembling as I held it in front of me. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until they stopped just outside the living room door. I held my breath, every muscle in my body tense with fear. The silence was deafening, the anticipation almost unbearable. Then the door slowly creaked open, and there he was. The man in the hoodie stood in the doorway, his face obscured, but I could see his eyes. Cold, dark, and filled with something that sent a shiver down my spine. He didn't speak. He just stood there, watching me, his presence filling the room with a suffocating sense of dread. I tightened my grip on the knife, my mind racing. I had to do something, had to protect myself. But before I could move, he took a step forward, and I froze. Why are you doing this? I finally managed to whisper, my voice shaking. He tilted his head slightly, as if considering my question, then took another step forward. Have you forgotten? He whispered, his voice low and raspy, like the sound of dry leaves rustling in the wind. The words sent a jolt of terror through me, and I stumbled back, my back hitting the wall. I wanted to scream, wanted to call for help, but my throat had closed up, the words trapped in my chest. He took another step forward, and I could see his face now, pale and gaunt, his eyes sunken deep into their sockets. There was something familiar about him, something that tugged at the edges of my memory, but I couldn't place it. Please, just leave me alone, I begged, my voice barely a whisper. But he didn't stop. He just kept coming, his footsteps soft and deliberate, until he was standing right in front of me. I closed my eyes, bracing myself for whatever was about to happen, but instead of the cold touch of his hand, I heard the door slam shut. When I opened my eyes, he was gone. The room was empty, the door closed, as if he had never been there. I collapsed to the floor, the knife slipping from my fingers as I gasped for breath. My whole body was trembling, my mind racing as I tried to make sense of what had just happened. But there were no answers, no explanation that made any sense. All I knew was that the man in the hoodie was gone, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I was alone. Or so I thought. As I sat there, trying to calm my racing heart, I noticed something on the floor, just a few feet away from where I was sitting. It was another note, written in the same neat, precise handwriting as before. This one said something different. You will remember. I never saw him again, but that last note couldn't be more right. It's been years since that night, and I remember it like it was just yesterday. I've always found something oddly calming about thunderstorms. There's a rhythm to them, the way the rain falls in sheets, the low rumble of thunder in the distance, the way the world seems to pause for a moment, wrapped in nature's fury. My 6-year-old son Arthur has inherited this fascination. It's become something of a tradition for us to sit together under the gazebo in our backyard and watch the storms roll in. That night in August started like any other. The storm had been predicted all week, a late summer tempest meant to break the heat wave that had kept us all sweltering for days. As soon as the first drops of rain began to patter against the windows, Arthur tugged at my sleeve, his eyes wide with excitement. "Dad, can we go outside, please?" I smiled at his enthusiasm. There was no denying him. "Sure, buddy, let's grab some snacks and head out to the gazebo." As we walked outside, the world was already transforming. The dark clouds overhead seemed to swallow the last remnants of daylight. turning the sky into a rolling, turbulent sea of gray. The air was thick and heavy, with the kind of stillness that only comes before a big storm. We made our way to the gazebo, an old wooden structure at the back of the yard, nestled near the tree line. It was our little haven, a place where we could sit and watch the world turn chaotic while staying safely dry. We settled in, Arthur munching on a bag of chips while I leaned back on the bench, listening to the soft rustle of leaves in the wind. The first flashes of lightning streaked across the sky, illuminating the trees at the edge of our yard in stark white light. Arthur's eyes were glued to the scene, the glow of the storm reflecting in his wide eyes. "Wow, did you see that one, Dad?" he asked, his voice full of awe. "Sure did," I replied, smiling at him. "It's a big one tonight." The storm continued to grow in intensity, the rain picking up until it was a steady roar on the gazebo's roof. Thunder cracked overhead, close enough to make us both jump slightly, followed by Arthur's giggle of excitement. There was something primal about being out there in the midst of the storm, yet safe from its reach. But as the storm raged on, something made me feel strange. It was subtle at first, just a feeling at the edge of my awareness, like the prickle of cold fingers on the back of my neck. The air seemed to grow colder, and the shadows cast by the lightning grew longer, deeper. I tried to shake off the unease, chalking it up to my imagination. That's when Arthur spoke up. "Dad, look over there," he said, pointing towards the tree line at the far end of the yard. I followed his gaze, squinting through the sheets of rain. For a moment, I saw nothing but the dark silhouette of the trees swaying in the wind. But then, as the next flash of lightning lit up the yard, I saw it. A figure standing just at the edge of the woods, almost blending in with the darkness. It was a person, or at least it looked like one. They were too far away for me to make out any details, but something about the way they stood, so still, so silent, sent a chill down my spine. Probably just someone from the neighborhood, I told myself, but the words rang hollow even as I said them. Why would anyone be out there in the middle of a storm just standing in our backyard? Arthur was watching me, waiting for reassurance. I forced a smile and patted his shoulder. "It's okay, buddy. Probably just someone passing by. Stay here, I'll go check it out." I grabbed the flashlight from the shelf by the door and stepped out into the storm, the rain soaking through my clothes in seconds. I made my way across the yard, the beam of the flashlight cutting through the sheets of rain. The figure was still there, standing motionless at the edge of the woods. "Hey," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "You all right?" No response. The figure didn't move, didn't acknowledge me at all. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. I was closer now, close enough to see that whoever it was, they were wearing something dark, maybe a hoodie with the hood pulled up over their head. "Listen, if you're lost, I can help you." I tried again, but there was still no reaction. I took a few more steps forward, but as I did, the figure turned and disappeared into the trees, moving so quickly and silently that for a moment I wondered if I had imagined the whole thing. The woods swallowed them up, the darkness closing in. I stood there for a moment, staring into the woods, my heart pounding. I wanted to follow, to make sure there really was someone out there, but the rational part of me knew it was a bad idea. I was already soaked to the bone, and the thought of stumbling through the woods in the dark, in the middle of a storm, didn't seem like the smartest plan. I turned back toward the house, forcing myself to walk calmly, not wanting to show Arthur how rattled I was. As I reached the gazebo, I found him sitting where I'd left him, his face pale. "Did you see him, Dad?" he asked, his voice small and frightened. "I saw someone, but they're gone now," I said, trying to sound reassuring. "Probably just someone from the neighborhood. They must have gotten lost in the storm." Arthur nodded, but he didn't look convinced. Neither was I, to be honest, but I didn't want to scare him. "Let's head inside, okay? This storm's getting worse." Arthur didn't argue. We gathered up our things and made our way back to the house, the wind howling around us. As we stepped inside, I locked the door behind us, feeling an odd sense of relief at being back in the warm, well-lit house. The storm continued to rage outside, the windows rattling in their frames, but at least we were safe, or so I thought. That night, the storm reached its peak. The rain came down in torrents, the wind howling like a living thing, shaking the house to its foundations. The power flickered a few times, casting the house in sudden darkness before the lights would buzz back to life. Arthur had gone to bed, but I could tell he was still uneasy about what we'd seen. After checking on him, I made my way to my own bedroom. I tried to shake off the lingering sense of unease, telling myself it was just the storm getting to me. But as I lay in bed, listening to the wind and the rain, sleep didn't come easily. It was sometime in the middle of the night when I heard Arthur's voice calling out for me. Dad, come here." I was out of bed in an instant, my heart racing. I hurried down the hallway to his room, finding him sitting up in bed, his eyes wide with fear. "What is it, Arthur? What's wrong?" I asked, kneeling beside him. "He's outside, Dad," Arthur whispered, pointing towards the window. "The man from the woods." My blood ran cold. I turned slowly to look out the window, my breath catching in my throat. At first I saw nothing but the rain-streaked glass, the trees thrashing in the wind beyond. But then, as the lightning flashed, I saw him. A figure standing just outside the window, so close I could almost make out his features. He was taller than I'd thought, with broad shoulders hunched under the weight of the storm. The hood was still up, hiding his face in shadow, but I could see his eyes, cold, dark eyes that seemed to bore into me. I felt a surge of protectiveness and fear all at once. This wasn't just some lost stranger. Whoever this was, they had come back, and now they were right outside my son's window. "Stay here," I told Arthur, my voice shaking slightly despite my efforts to stay calm. "I'm going to take care of this." I didn't wait for a response. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept in the closet and headed outside, my heart pounding in my chest. The house felt different now, the walls closing in around me as I made my way to the back door. I threw it open and stepped out into the storm once more, the bat clenched tightly in my hands. The rain was coming down even harder now, each drop like a tiny hammer on my skin. I moved quickly, scanning the yard for any sign of the figure. For a moment, I thought he was gone. But then I saw him, standing by the corner of the house, half hidden in the shadows. He was watching me. "Hey," I shouted, raising the bat. "Get the hell out of here! Leave us alone!" The figure didn't move. He just stood there, watching me with those dark, unblinking eyes. My pulse was racing, a mix of fear and anger churning in my gut. I took a step forward, ready to chase him off if I had to, but before I could move, he was gone. One moment he was there, the next he wasn't. I blinked, disoriented, my mind struggling to catch up. I stood there, drenched and shaking, staring at the empty spot where he had been. Part of me wanted to run after him to make sure he was really gone, but the more rational part of me knew better. This wasn't something I could handle on my own. I backed away slowly, my eyes scanning the yard for any sign of movement. When I reached the door, I turned and bolted inside, locking it behind me. My breath came in ragged gasps as I leaned against the door, the bat slipping from my hands. I went back to check on Arthur. He was still in bed, clutching his blanket, his eyes wide with fear. "It's okay, buddy," I said, trying to sound calm. "He's gone. We're safe now." But as I sat there holding my son, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. The storm still raged outside, the wind howling through the trees, and somewhere out there in the darkness, I knew he was still watching. The storm finally passed in the early hours of the morning, leaving behind a world drenched and battered by the night's fury. I didn't sleep after that second encounter, instead staying by Arthur's side, listening for any sign of the intruder returning. But the house remained eerily silent, save for the steady drip of rainwater from the eaves. When dawn broke, I went outside again, this time armed with a sense of determination rather than fear. I needed to know if there was any trace of the man who had stalked our yard through the storm. The yard was a mess, the grass slick with mud and debris scattered everywhere. I walked the perimeter, checking the tree line and the corner of the house where I had last seen him. There were no footprints, no signs that anyone had been there. It was as if the storm had washed away all evidence of his presence. But I knew what I had seen, what Arthur had seen. It wasn't just our imaginations playing tricks on us. I called the police, explaining what had happened. They came by later that morning, taking my statement and walking the property with me. But like me, they found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no clues as to who the figure might have been or what he wanted. It's possible it was just someone trying to find shelter from the storm, one of the officers suggested, though his tone didn't convey much conviction. Maybe. I replied, but I didn't believe it. There was something about the way the man had appeared, the way he had watched us, that didn't fit with the idea of a lost traveler. After the police left, I spent the rest of the day feeling on edge, my nerves frayed from the lack of sleep and the lingering fear that he might return. Arthur was quiet too, staying close to me as we went about our day. I tried to keep things normal, but the unease hung over us like a shadow. That night, after Arthur was asleep, I went back outside one last time. The air was cool and still, the storm's fury replaced by an almost eerie calm. I walked the yard again, flashlight in hand, checking every corner, every shadow, but once again, there was nothing. I stood at the edge of the yard, looking out into the woods. The trees were dark and silent, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was still out there, watching. As I turned to go back inside, I caught a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye. I whipped around, shining the flashlight into the trees, but I saw nothing. Just the darkness, stretching on and on. I stayed out there for a long time, staring into the woods, trying to convince myself that it was over, that we were safe. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. The storm had passed, but the fear it brought with it had left its mark, a lingering sense of dread that wouldn't easily fade. I went back inside, locking the door behind me. As I lay in bed that night, I couldn't help but think of the man, standing out there in the storm, watching us. Whoever he was, wherever he had come from, I knew he was still out there. And I had a feeling he wasn't done with us yet. Moving into a new place always comes with a mix of excitement and anxiety. There's the thrill of starting fresh, of making a space your own, but there's also the stress of unpacking, settling in, and adjusting to unfamiliar surroundings. For me, the move was supposed to be a new beginning. I was ready to leave the city behind, to trade the noise and chaos for peace and quiet. The house itself was charming in its way, with tall windows and a large yard. It had been sitting empty for a while, the previous owners having moved out suddenly. But that didn't bother me. The rent was cheap, and the neighborhood was quiet, just what I needed. The first few days were a whirlwind of unpacking and getting settled. I spent most of my time arranging furniture, hanging pictures, and trying to make the place feel like home. The house was drafty, with the kind of chill that seeps into your bones. I figured once I got the heater going, it would warm up. The only part of the house I didn't like was the basement. It was a typical old house basement, dark, damp, and musty, with low ceilings and crumbling concrete walls. The stairs leading down were steep and narrow, and the single light bulb that hung from the ceiling flickered ominously whenever it was turned on. I had only gone down there once to check out the space, and I didn't plan on going back unless I absolutely had to. It gave me the creeps, but I tried not to think too much about it. After all, basements were supposed to be creepy, right? That night, as I sat in the living room, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, the first storm rolled in. It was one of those sudden summer storms, the sky darkening in an instant, the wind picking up, and then the rain pouring down in sheets. I watched from the window as lightning lit up the sky. I had always loved storms, the power, the raw energy of them. They were nature's way of reminding us how small we really are. But there was something different about this one. Maybe it was the new house, the unfamiliar surroundings, or maybe it was just my nerves. But as the storm raged on, a sense of unease began to settle over me. It started with a noise, a low, rhythmic thumping that seemed to echo through the house. At first, I thought it was just the wind, or maybe something outside being tossed around by the storm. But as I listened, I realized it was coming from inside the house. I stood up, my heart beginning to race as I tried to pinpoint the source of the sound. It was coming from below, from the basement. I hesitated, a knot of fear tightening in my stomach. I didn't want to go down there, didn't want to face whatever might be causing that noise. But I couldn't just ignore it. The rational part of my brain told me it was probably just a loose pipe, or maybe the old furnace acting up. I needed to check it out. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and made my way to the basement door. It creaked open, revealing the steep stairs descending into darkness. The thumping noise was louder now, echoing up from below like the steady beat of a drum. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves, and started down the stairs, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The air grew colder with each step, the musty smell of the basement wrapping around me like a shroud. The noise grew louder, more insistent, as if something was waiting for me. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, I shone the flashlight around the room, trying to locate the source of the sound. The basement was just as I remembered it. Dark, damp, and cluttered with old, forgotten junk left behind by previous tenants. The walls were stained with age, the concrete floor uneven and cracked. And there, at the far end of the room, was a door I hadn't noticed before. It was small, barely more than a crawl space, and it was locked with a heavy, rusted padlock. The thumping was coming from behind that door, a steady, relentless rhythm that sent chills down my spine. I stood there, frozen, the flashlight beam trembling in my hand. But there was a part of me that couldn't bear not knowing what was causing the noise, and that drove me forward. I took a step closer to the door, the sound of my own breathing loud in my ears. The thumping continued, a slow, deliberate beat like a heart pounding against the walls. I reached out, my hand shaking as I touched the cold metal of the padlock. It was old, rusted, but solid, the kind of lock that hadn't been opened in years. And then, suddenly, the thumping stopped. I froze, the silence pressing in around me like a weight. The only sound was the rain pounding against the ground outside, the wind howling through the trees. My heart was racing, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. I couldn't stay down there any longer. I turned and ran up the stairs, not stopping until I had slammed the basement door shut behind me. I stood there, my back against the door, trying to catch my breath, trying to convince myself that it was just my imagination, that there was nothing down there. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. The next day, I couldn't stop thinking about the basement. The storm had passed, leaving behind a bright, clear morning, but the unease lingered. I tried to go about my day, focusing on unpacking and organizing, but the thought of that locked door, of whatever had been making that noise, nagged at me. I knew I had to go back down there. I had to know what was behind that door. I waited until the afternoon, when the sun was high in the sky and the house was bathed in warm, comforting light. It was easier to face the basement in the daylight, easier to convince myself that there was nothing to be afraid of. I grabbed the flashlight again, along with a crowbar I had found in the garage, and made my way back to the basement. The stairs creaked under my weight, the air growing colder with each step, but I forced myself to keep going. When I reached the bottom, the basement was just as dark and musty as before, but the thumping noise was gone. The silence was almost worse, though, thick and oppressive. I made my way to the locked door, my heart pounding in my chest. The padlock was still there, old and rusted, but I was determined to get it open. I wedged the crowbar under the lock and began to pry, the metal groaning. It took longer than I expected, the old lock stubbornly refusing to give way, but finally, with a loud snap, it broke free. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow, dark passageway that led deeper into the basement. I hesitated, shining the flashlight into the darkness. The air was colder here, the musty smell more intense. The passageway was barely wide enough for me to squeeze through, the walls closing in around me as I stepped inside. I moved slowly, the flashlight beam trembling in my hand. The passageway seemed to go on forever. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, the fear building with each step. And then, at the end of the passageway, I saw it, a small, dimly lit room, the walls lined with old, decaying wood. In the center of the room was a single chair, and sitting in that chair was a figure, slumped over and still. I stopped, my breath catching in my throat. The figure was small, almost childlike, its head bowed, its hands resting limply in its lap. The clothes were old, tattered, and covered in dust, as if they had been there for years. I stepped closer, my heart racing, the fear clawing at my chest. I could see the figure more clearly now. A young girl, no more than 8 or 9 years old, her hair matted and tangled, her skin pale and lifeless. I wanted to run, wanted to get as far away from that room as possible, but I couldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, my eyes locked on the girl's face, on the hollow, empty eyes that stared back at me. And then, to my horror, she moved. Her head lifted, her eyes meeting mine, and a slow, eerie smile spread across her face. Her lips parted, and in a voice that was barely more than a whisper, she spoke. "Why did you leave me?" I stumbled back, the flashlight slipping from my grasp and clattering to the floor. The room was plunged into darkness, and I could feel the cold, clammy air closing in around me, the sound of her voice echoing in my ears. I turned and ran, blindly groping my way back through the passageway, my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear her behind me, the soft sound of footsteps, the whisper of her voice, growing louder, closer. "Why did you leave me?" I burst out of the passageway and raced up the stairs, slamming the basement door shut behind me. I didn't stop until I was outside, the bright sunlight blinding me as I stumbled into the yard. I leaned against the side of the house, gasping for breath, my mind reeling. What had I just seen? Was it real? Or was it some twisted figment of my imagination, brought on by the fear and the darkness of the basement? But deep down, I knew it was real. I knew that the girl in the basement was real, and that she was still down there. The days that followed were a blur of fear and confusion. I couldn't stop thinking about the girl in the basement, couldn't stop hearing her voice in my head, that haunting question that echoed in my mind. Why did you leave me? I couldn't stay in the house anymore. The fear was too much, the sense of dread too overwhelming. I started sleeping in my car, parked in the driveway, too afraid to go back inside. But even then, I couldn't escape her. The fear followed me, gnawing at my mind, driving me to the brink of madness. I knew I had to leave, had to get as far away from that house as possible. But there was something that kept pulling me back, something that wouldn't let me go. It was like the house itself had a hold on me, like the girl in the basement was calling out to me, begging me to stay. And then one night, as I sat in my car, trying to will myself to drive away, I heard it again. The thumping noise, faint but unmistakable, coming from the basement. I couldn't ignore it any longer. I had to know what was going on, had to confront whatever was down there once and for all. I grabbed the flashlight and made my way back into the house, my heart pounding in my chest. The basement door creaked open, and I descended into the darkness. The air was colder than ever, the musty smell almost suffocating. The thumping noise grew louder as I reached the bottom, echoing through the room like the beating of a drum. I made my way to the passageway, the flashlight beam trembling in my hand. The door was still open, the darkness inside beckoning me forward. I stepped into the passageway, my breath catching in my throat as I made my way to the room at the end. The girl was still there, sitting in the chair, her eyes fixed on me. The eerie smile was gone, replaced by an expression of sadness, of longing. Her voice was soft, almost pleading as she spoke. "Why did you leave me?" I couldn't move, couldn't speak. The fear had taken hold, paralyzing me as I stood there, staring at her. She slowly stood up. "Why did you leave me?" she repeated, her voice growing louder, more insistent. "Why did you leave me?" I wanted to scream, to run, but I was rooted to the spot, unable to tear my eyes away from her. She took a step forward, then another, her hollow eyes locked on mine. And then, with a desperate effort, I turned and ran, the sound of her voice echoing in my ears, the darkness closing in around me. I didn't stop until I was outside, the cold night air biting at my skin, the fear still gnawing at my mind. I knew I couldn't stay there any longer. I had to leave, had to get as far away from that house as possible. I grabbed what little I could carry and drove away, the fear still gripping me, the girl's voice still echoing in my mind. I never went back. I couldn't. The house was sold, and I moved on, trying to put the past behind me. But no matter how far I ran, I could never escape the memory of the girl in the basement, the fear that still haunted me. And sometimes late at night, when the world is quiet and the darkness presses in, I can still hear her voice calling out to me. "Why did you leave me?" Driving at night has always been something I've enjoyed. There's something peaceful about it. The way the world quiets down, the road's empty except for the occasional passing car. It's like the darkness brings a sense of calm that daylight never could. So when the storm started that evening, I didn't think much of it. I'd driven through worse. I was on my way home from my parents' place, a trip I made at least once a month. The route was familiar. Country roads winding through miles of open fields and dense woods, the kind of roads that felt secluded even during the day. At night, especially with a storm rolling in, they could feel downright desolate. The first raindrops splattered against my windshield as I pulled onto the main road, the sky a deep, bruised gray. I turned on the wipers, listening to the rhythmic thump as they swept the water away. The storm was picking up quickly, the rain coming down harder, the wind buffeting the car. Thunder rumbled in the distance, growing louder with each passing minute. I drove on, my headlights illuminating the darkness ahead, the road barely visible in the downpour. I knew these roads well, every curve, every bump, but the storm had a way of making even the most familiar places feel strange, almost menacing. It was about halfway home when I saw him. The rain was coming down in sheets, so thick it was like driving through a waterfall. I was focused on the road, trying to keep my car from sliding on the slick pavement, when a flash of lightning lit up the sky. In that brief, blinding moment, I saw him, a man standing in the middle of the road, dressed entirely in white. My heart leaped into my throat, and I slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching as they fought for traction. The car swerved, and for a terrifying second, I thought I was going to lose control. But then, miraculously, the tires caught and the car skidded to a stop, just inches away from where the man had been standing. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The rain was pounding on the roof, the sound deafening, but all I could think about was the man I had almost hit. I couldn't see him anymore. The darkness and the rain had swallowed him up. Who the hell would be out here in the middle of a storm, wearing all white, just standing in the road? The question echoed in my mind, but there was no answer, just the relentless pounding of the rain. Slowly, I released my grip on the steering wheel and peered through the windshield, squinting into the darkness. The road ahead was empty, the man in white nowhere to be seen. I should have felt relieved, but instead a chill ran down my spine, the kind of cold that settles deep in your bones. Maybe he had moved off the road, I thought. Maybe he was just some poor soul who got caught in the storm and was trying to find shelter. But if that were true, why hadn't I seen him move? It was like he had just vanished into thin air. I shook my head, trying to shake off the unease that had settled over me. I couldn't just sit there all night. I needed to get home. With one last glance at the empty road, I put the car back in gear and slowly started driving again, my hands still trembling on the wheel. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The rain seemed louder now, the wind more insistent, like it was trying to tell me something. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the man in white standing behind me, but the road was empty, just the way it should be. But deep down I knew something wasn't right, and it was about to get a lot worse. I was almost home, just a few miles to go when it happened. The storm was at its peak now, the wind howling like a living thing, the rain so heavy it was like driving through a curtain of water. I had to slow down, the car barely crawling along as I tried to see the road ahead. That's when I saw him again. It was just a flicker of movement at first, a pale shape darting across the road, barely visible through the rain. My heart skipped a beat and I slammed on the brakes again, my mind racing. I had seen him, hadn't I? The man in white, running across the road. I peered through the windshield, my breath fogging up the glass. For a moment, everything was still, the only sound the relentless drumming of the rain. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw him, a flash of white darting on the side of the road. Panic surged through me, and I yanked the wheel to the side, trying to avoid him. The tires skidded on the wet pavement, and the car spun out of control. I felt the world tilt, the headlights sweeping across the trees in a dizzying blur. And then, with a sickening crunch, the car slammed into something solid. The impact knocked the breath out of me, the seatbelt cutting into my chest as I was thrown forward. For a moment, everything went dark, the world reduced to the sound of my own ragged breathing and the rain hammering on the roof. When I opened my eyes, I was slumped over the steering wheel, my head pounding, my vision blurry. The car had come to a stop, half on the road, half in the ditch, the front end crumpled against a tree. I sat there for a moment, trying to catch my breath, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The man in white. I had seen him, hadn't I? But now, in the cold aftermath of the crash, I wasn't so sure. Had I really seen someone, or had the storm and the darkness played tricks on me? Gingerly, I reached up and touched my forehead, wincing as my fingers brushed a tender spot. I was bleeding, just a small cut, but it added to the growing sense of panic that was building inside me. I needed to get out of the car, needed to see if the man was still out there. I fumbled with the seatbelt, my hands shaking, and finally managed to unclip it. The car door groaned as I pushed it open, the rain immediately soaking me to the skin. I stepped out, my legs unsteady beneath me, and looked around. The road was empty. No sign of the man in white. No sign of anything, really. Just the trees looming on either side of the road, their branches swaying in the wind. I walked around the front of the car, the headlights casting long shadows across the wet ground. The front bumper was smashed, the hood crumpled from the impact, but wasn't as bad as it could have been. I'd been lucky. I realized that I hadn't been going faster. Still, the car was stuck, half in the ditch, the tires spinning uselessly in the mud. I pulled out my phone, hoping to call for help, but of course, there was no signal. Not out here, in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of a storm. I cursed under my breath, shoving the phone back into my pocket. I stood there, my mind reeling. Had I really seen him? Or was I losing my mind? The rain was still pouring down, the wind still howling, but I barely noticed. I was too shaken, too confused to care about anything else. All I knew was that I had to get out of there, had to get away from whatever it was I had just encountered. I stumbled back to the car, my hands trembling as I fumbled for the door handle. I had to get out of here, had to get home. But as I reached for the door, I heard a sound. Close, like something was moving through the trees, coming toward me. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. But it wasn't the man in white. It was my father. I was so shaken that I hadn't even noticed his car coming. "Dad!" I cried out, relief flooding through me. He was soaked to the bone, his clothes plastered to his body. But I didn't care. He was here. I wasn't alone anymore. "Are you okay?" he called back, hurrying over to me. "What happened? I saw your car." I cut him off, my words tumbling out in a rush. "There was a man. He was in the road. I crashed. He was here, Dad. He was right here." My father's brow furrowed as he looked around, his gaze sweeping over the trees, the road, the empty space where the man in white had been. "I don't see anyone," he said, his voice calm but cautious. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure," I insisted, my voice shaking. "He was right there, I swear." My father looked at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded. "Okay," he said, his voice steady. "Let's get you out of here. We'll figure this out later." He helped me into his truck, and we drove the rest of the way home in silence. The storm was still raging outside, but inside the truck it felt like a different world, warm and dry. I kept looking out the window, half expecting to see the man in white standing by the side of the road, but he was gone. Just like before, it was like he had never been there. "Maybe it was a spirit," my father said quietly after a long pause. "You hear stories out here in the country about things that walk the roads at night, especially during storms. Lost souls, looking for something, or someone." I shivered, the thought sending a chill down my spine. I didn't want to believe it, didn't want to think that what I had seen was something other than human. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. There was something otherworldly about the man in white, something that didn't belong in this world. That night, I couldn't sleep at all. When the morning came, I got a call from the police. They had found my car, still stuck in the ditch where I had left it. They asked me to come down to the station, said they had some questions. When I arrived, the officer in charge showed me a picture. It was of the man in white, just as I had described him. Pale, gaunt, dressed in old-fashioned clothes that looked like they belonged in another century. "Do you recognize this man?" the officer asked. I nodded, my throat dry. "That's him," I said. "That's the man I saw." The officer exchanged a look with his partner, then turned back to me. "We've been getting reports about him for years," he said, his voice low. "People see him on the road, usually during storms, but no one's ever been able to find him, not alive anyway." "What do you mean?" I asked, a chill running down my spine. The officer hesitated, then handed me a newspaper clipping, yellowed with age. The headline sent a jolt of fear through me. Local man found dead in storm, dressed in white, missing for days. I stared at the clipping, my mind reeling. The date was from over 50 years ago. The man in the picture was the same one I had seen on the road, the same one who had caused me to crash, who had watched me with those cold, dark eyes. "We don't know what he wants," the officer said quietly, "but people say he's looking for something, or someone." I left the station in a daze, the newspaper clipping clutched in my hand. The storm had cleared, the sky a bright, cloudless blue, but I couldn't shake the cold that had settled over me. I still drive that road sometimes, but never at night, never during a storm. And every time I pass the spot where I crashed, I think about the man in white, about what he might be looking for. And I pray that I never find out. If these stories sent shivers down your spine, don't forget to hit the like button and share the fear with your friends. Subscribe for more bone-chilling tales and make sure to turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Have a horror story of your own? Drop it in the comments. We'd love to hear it. Stay safe and remember, the scariest things often happen when you least expect them. See you in the next nightmare.